My name is Claire Bennett, and I am 34 years old. 10 days ago, my parents knocked on my front door for the first time in almost 10 years. My mother stood on my porch wearing an expensive beige coat that looked far newer than the last memory I had of her. My father stood 2 steps behind her, avoiding eye contact, his hands buried deep inside his pockets. Neither of them smiled. Neither of them asked how I had been. Neither of them asked about my husband. Neither of them asked about the 2 grandchildren they had never met. Instead, my mother held out a leather folder. Inside was a neatly typed financial proposal. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Family Assistance Request." Below, it was a number, $750,000. She cleared her throat. "We've fallen on difficult times," she said. "You're successful now. We expect you to help your family." Expect, not hope, not ask. Expect. I stared at the paper for several seconds before looking back at her. Then I smiled, not because I was happy, because for 10 years I had imagined this exact moment. Only she didn't know something. While she had prepared a financial proposal, I had prepared something too. For nearly a decade, I had kept every letter she returned unopened, every voicemail my father ignored, every birthday invitation they refused, every photograph they mailed back with "Return to Sender" stamped across the envelope. 43 pieces of evidence, everyone dated, everyone organized, everyone stored inside a gray storage box in my office. She brought a request. I had brought the truth. But before I tell you what happened that afternoon, I need to take you back 10 years. Back to the day my parents decided that loving the man I chose meant I was no longer their daughter. I grew up in Cedar Ridge, a quiet town outside Nashville, where everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. If someone painted their mailbox a different color, the neighbors talked about it for a week. If someone bought a new truck, everyone knew the monthly payment. If a family argued in church on Sunday, people discussed it until Christmas. My father, Richard Bennett, owned the largest hardware store in town. People respected him, or maybe they feared him. Sometimes it was difficult to tell the difference. He believed success measured a person's value, money, status, connections. Those were the 3 things he respected most. My mother, Susan Bennett, cared even more about appearances. Every curtain matched. Every family photograph looked perfect. Every holiday dinner had to look like it belonged in a magazine. She often said, "People judge a family by what they see." Looking back, she was right, because the day I disappointed her, she decided she didn't want anyone seeing me at all. Then there was my younger brother, Ethan, 3 years younger, funny, popular, never told no. Dad called him the future of the family. I was simply the responsible one. I studied hard, worked part-time, never caused trouble, straight A's, honor roll, business degree, scholarship. My parents were proud. As long as I followed the future they had already planned for me. Graduate, marry someone successful, buy a large house, join the country club, represent the Bennett family. Simple. There was only one problem. Life had other plans. I met Daniel Carter during my final semester at college. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He didn't drive a luxury car. His shoes were worn from working construction during the day while finishing evening classes. The first thing I noticed wasn't his appearance. It was his kindness. One rainy afternoon, I dropped my books across the campus parking lot. Students walked around me without stopping. Daniel didn't. He knelt beside me in the rain, picking up every notebook while getting completely soaked. When I apologized, he laughed. "They're just clothes," he said. "But your accounting notes look important." I laughed too. That conversation lasted 5 minutes. Our friendship lasted months. Eventually, it became love. Daniel never pretended to be someone he wasn't. His father had died when he was 14. His mother cleaned hotel rooms to support the family. Daniel worked every spare hour he could. Construction, landscaping, warehouse shifts, anything honest. He dreamed of opening his own home renovation company someday. Not because he wanted to become rich, because he wanted to build something that belonged to him, something no one could ever take away. That dream impressed me more than any luxury car ever could. For 2 years, our relationship was wonderfully ordinary. Cheap coffee dates, long walks, shared pizza, watching old movies on a second-hand couch. Neither of us had much money, but somehow, we always had enough. Enough laughter, enough hope, enough love. I had never felt so safe with another person. Daniel listened more than he talked. When I doubted myself, he reminded me what I was capable of. When work overwhelmed him, I stayed awake helping him prepare business plans he hoped to use one day. We weren't building wealth. We were building trust. Looking back, that mattered far more. The first time Daniel met my parents was during Thanksgiving. Mom smiled politely, too politely. Dad shook Daniel's hand without looking into his eyes. Dinner felt like a business interview. Dad asked about income, savings, career plans, investments. Daniel answered every question honestly. "I work construction right now. I rent an apartment. I'm saving to start my own company." My father nodded once, then changed the subject. Driving home, Daniel apologized. "I don't think your parents like me." I squeezed his hand. "They just need time." I wanted to believe that. I really did. A month later, my mother invited me to lunch. She didn't mention Daniel until dessert arrived. Then she placed her fork down. "Claire," she said quietly, "he's a nice young man." I smiled. "I know. But nice doesn't pay mortgages." My smile disappeared. She continued, "You've worked too hard to throw your future away." "I love him," she sighed. "Love doesn't pay bills," I answered softly. "Neither does arrogance." The restaurant became very quiet. She stared at me for several seconds. Then she stood up. "You'll understand someday." She left before finishing her coffee. I watched her walk away, not realizing that lunch would become the beginning of the end. 2 months later, Daniel proposed. Not in a luxury hotel, not on a tropical beach, not with a giant diamond. He proposed inside the small apartment we shared after cooking my favorite pasta. After dinner, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple ring. "I can't promise you an easy life," he said. "I can't promise expensive vacations or a mansion. But I can promise that every single day I'll work as hard as I can to give you the life you deserve." His hands were shaking. So were mine. I didn't even let him finish. Yes, it was the easiest decision I had ever made. I called my parents that same night. I thought they would eventually accept it. I was wrong. Very, very wrong. When my mother answered the phone, she didn't congratulate me. She didn't ask about the ring. She was silent for nearly 10 seconds. Then she spoke only one sentence. "If you marry that poor man, don't expect to remain part of this family." And with those words, everything changed. My parents kicked me out for marrying a poor man. 10 years later, they came asking for money. Part 2. For a long time after that phone call, I just sat on the floor of our apartment with my phone still in my hand. Daniel walked into the living room carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. One look at my face, and he knew something was wrong. What happened? I couldn't answer right away. I simply handed him the phone. He didn't ask to see the screen. He just sat beside me and wrapped his arm around my shoulders. They're not happy, are they? I slowly shook my head. My mom said, "If I marry you, I'm no longer part of the family." Daniel stared at the floor for several seconds. "I'll understand if you change your mind." I looked at him in disbelief. "What?" "I don't want you to lose your family because of me." Those words broke my heart more than anything my mother had said, because he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about me. I took both of his hands. "Daniel, I'm not choosing between you and my family. They're making that choice." For the first time that evening, he smiled, a small smile, but it was enough. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Not a text, not an email, a handwritten letter. My mother's handwriting was as neat as it had always been, every word perfectly spaced, every sentence carefully planned. The final paragraph read, "If you go through with this marriage, do not return to our home expecting to be welcomed. We cannot support a decision that will ruin your future. A husband who cannot provide for you will only become your burden. Think carefully before throwing your life away." There was no love, Mom, only Susan Bennett. It felt less like a letter from my mother and more like a legal notice. I folded it carefully and placed it inside a small document box in my closet. I didn't know why. Something inside me simply refused to throw it away. A week later, my father called. For a brief moment, I thought everything might be okay. Maybe he wanted to fix this. Maybe he wanted to understand. Instead, he spoke for less than 2 minutes. "If you marry him, don't expect another dollar from this family. I've never asked you for money. You'll never receive any either. I don't want your money. You'll regret saying that." Click. The line went dead. That was the shortest conversation we had ever shared. It would also be our last, for nearly 10 years. Daniel suggested postponing the wedding. Maybe they'll calm down. But I already knew they wouldn't. This wasn't about time. It wasn't about patience. It wasn't even about Daniel. It was about pride. My parents had spent my entire life deciding what success looked like, and Daniel didn't fit the picture they wanted to show the world. We got married on a warm Saturday afternoon in early June. There were only 15 guests. Most of them were Daniel's friends from work. His mother, Linda, cried through almost the entire ceremony. She hugged me before we walked into the small community chapel. "I've always wanted a daughter," she whispered. "Now I finally have one." No one from my side of the family came. Not my parents, not my brother, not my cousins, not even the aunt who used to send me birthday cards every year. An entire branch of my family disappeared overnight. Still, it was the happiest day of my life. Daniel couldn't stop smiling. Neither could I. We didn't have expensive decorations. The flowers came from a local grocery store. My wedding dress had been purchased secondhand. Daniel borrowed his suit from his best friend. Our wedding cake was homemade by Linda. It leaned slightly to one side. Everyone laughed. It was perfect. Because perfection isn't about money, it's about love. 3 days after the wedding, I mailed my parents a photograph. On the back, I wrote only one sentence: We're happy. I hope someday you'll be happy for us too. 11 days later. The envelope came back. Across the front was a bright red stamp. Return to sender. No note, no explanation, nothing. I stood in our kitchen staring at that stamp for nearly 5 minutes. Daniel quietly walked over. I'm sorry, I nodded. Then I opened the document box, placed the returned envelope inside, and wrote on a small label, Item number 2, wedding photo returned. I closed the lid. For reasons I couldn't explain, I had started keeping records. The first year of our marriage wasn't glamorous. Daniel worked 12-hour construction shifts. I found an entry-level accounting job. We rented a tiny apartment above an old bakery. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the floor every morning at 5. The walls were thin. The kitchen barely had enough room for 2 people. Sometimes we laughed because opening the refrigerator blocked the oven door. Money was tight, very tight. There were weeks when we planned every grocery trip down to the last dollar. We skipped vacations. We skipped restaurants. We skipped buying new clothes. But we never skipped dinner together. Every evening we sat across from each other at our little kitchen table. Sometimes it was pasta, sometimes soup, sometimes peanut butter sandwiches. Daniel always smiled before taking the first bite. Someday, he'd say, we'll laugh about this. I believed him, not because life was easy, but because he had never broken a promise. I called my mother on her birthday. Voicemail. I left a message. Happy birthday, Mom. I hope you're doing well. I miss you. She never called back. I mailed a Christmas card. It came back unopened. I mailed another card for my father's birthday. Returned. Every envelope carried the same red stamp. Returned to sender. Each one went into the document box. Each one received a number. Item 3. Item 4, Item 5. I wasn't collecting evidence for revenge. At least, that's what I told myself. I simply wanted the truth preserved, because memories fade. Paper doesn't. One evening, Daniel came home later than usual. His work boots were covered in mud. He looked exhausted, but there was excitement in his eyes. I've been thinking. About what? My own company. I smiled. You've always been thinking about it. This time I'm serious. He spread blueprints and notebooks across the kitchen table. I know I don't have investors. I know I don't have money, but I know how to build houses. I know how to treat customers. And I know I can do better than the companies I've worked for. I looked at the plans for almost an hour. Business expenses, marketing ideas, equipment costs, potential profits. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, very real. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Let's build it. He looked surprised. You really believe we can? I don't believe. I smiled. I know. That night, neither of us realized that tiny stack of handwritten business plans would someday change everything. And someday, the very people who called him too poor would come begging for the fortune he built with his own hands. The next 6 months became the hardest and the most important months of our lives. Daniel quit his construction job on a cold Monday morning, not because he wanted to, because we had finally saved just enough money to take a chance. We sat at our tiny kitchen table with a calculator, a notebook, and every dollar we owned. Our savings totaled $31,842. That wasn't much. It was everything. Daniel looked at the number for a long time. If this fails, I interrupted him, then we'll start over. You've worked just as hard for this money as I have, so we'll risk it together." He reached across the table and took my hand. "I promise you one thing." "What's that?" "No matter how successful I become, I'll never forget what it felt like to have almost nothing." I believed him, because humility wasn't something Daniel practiced. It was simply who he was. He rented a small warehouse on the edge of town. The paint was peeling. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The office consisted of one old desk, 2 folding chairs, and a coffee maker older than both of us. Daniel hung a simple sign outside: Carter Home Renovations. No fancy logo, no expensive advertisements, just his name, his reputation, and a phone number. The first month, the phone barely rang. One customer, then another, then nothing for 2 weeks. There were nights when Daniel stared at the ceiling instead of sleeping. "I made a mistake." "You didn't. What if your parents were right?" "They weren't. We're barely surviving." "We're surviving. There's a difference." He smiled weakly. "You always know what to say." "No." I laughed softly. "I just know you." To help keep the business alive, I worked full-time during the day and handled the company's accounting every evening. Invoices, payroll, taxes, permits, insurance, everything. Our apartment slowly filled with folders instead of decorations. Receipts covered the dining table, blueprints covered the couch, coffee cups covered every flat surface. We were exhausted, but strangely, we were happy. Every tiny success felt enormous. The first 5-star review online, the first repeat customer, the first month we actually made a profit. We celebrated with 2 cheeseburgers and a milkshake we shared because we couldn't justify buying 2. It remains one of the best meals I've ever had. About a year after Daniel started the company, I received an unexpected phone call. It was my younger brother, Ethan. I hadn't spoken to him since the wedding. For a moment, I thought maybe he missed me. Instead, he laughed. "I heard Daniel started his own business." "He did." "Construction?" "Yes." "Good luck with that." I stayed quiet. "You know, Dad says businesses like that fail every day." "I'm not interested in Dad's opinion." "You could still come back." "Come back?" "Leave him. Apologize. I'm sure Mom would forgive you eventually." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to divorce my husband so Mom and Dad will talk to me again?" "I'm just trying to help." "No, you aren't." Before he could answer, I ended the call. It lasted less than 3 minutes. That evening I wrote another label, item number 6. Ethan suggested leaving my husband to regain the family. The document box was beginning to fill. Life moved forward. Slowly, patiently. Daniel's reputation grew. People recommended him to neighbors. Neighbors recommended him to friends. Within 3 years, Carter Home Renovations had 6 employees, then 12, then 18. Daniel refused to lower his standards. If we wouldn't build it for ourselves, we won't build it for anyone else. Customers trusted him. Employees respected him. I admired him more every single year. One Friday afternoon, I found out I was pregnant. I drove straight to Daniel's office. He was covered in sawdust, helping his crew install kitchen cabinets. I walked inside, holding the test in my purse. He smiled when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" "I have news." "Good news or bad news?" "The best." I handed him the small gift box. Inside was a tiny pair of baby shoes. For several seconds, he simply stared. Then his eyes filled with tears. "Really?" I nodded. "We're having a baby." He wrapped both arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. I don't care if we ever become rich. I already have everything I've ever wanted. We sent ultrasound pictures to my parents. No response. We mailed a letter announcing the pregnancy. Returned. Months later, our daughter Emma was born. She had Daniel's bright blue eyes and my dark hair. The first person to hold her, after us, was Daniel's mother, Linda. She kissed Emma's forehead and whispered, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart." I cried, not because I was sad, because I suddenly understood something. Family isn't always the people who raise you. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stay. I mailed another envelope to my parents. Inside were 3 photographs, one of Daniel holding Emma, one of me smiling beside them, and one close-up of Emma sleeping peacefully. I wrote only one sentence. "Your granddaughter is beautiful." 2 weeks later, the envelope came back unopened. The familiar red stamp covered nearly half the package. Return to sender. I didn't cry this time. I simply walked upstairs, opened the document box, placed it inside, then added another label. Item number 11. Granddaughter's birth announcement returned unopened. Daniel quietly watched me from the doorway. "You still keep all of it." I nodded. "I don't know why." He walked over and kissed my forehead. "Maybe someday you'll need to remember." I looked at the growing stack of envelopes, letters, birthday cards, Christmas cards, returned photographs, ignored invitations, years of silence, carefully preserved inside one box. For the first time, I realized I wasn't keeping them because I hoped my parents would change. I was keeping them because deep down, I knew that one day they would come back. And when they did, I wanted the truth to be impossible to deny.